They thought I was just a docile housewife blind to the neon lights and the ledger books. But when my husband arrogantly introduced his mistress as the CEO of my $220 million casino, he had no idea he was going all in on a fixed hand. This is not a story about luck. It is a high-stakes wager for honor where the loser walks away with absolutely nothing. My name is Elena, and if you believed the society pages, I was the luckiest woman in Nevada. We were seated at the best table in La Lumiere, a 5-star restaurant where the air smelled of truffles and old money. My husband, Derek, had his arm around my waist, flashing his perfectly whitened teeth for the photographers while my mother-in-law, Beatrice, played the role of the doting matriarch to perfection. It was a flawless performance, just beneath the surface. However, Derek was pinching my side to make me smile wider, and Beatrice was glaring at me because I had paused too long before answering a reporter. They barely tolerated me, seeing me as nothing more than a dull accessory to their vibrant, ambitious lives. Then my Aunt Josephine arrived. She did not wait for an invitation. She marched through the dining room like a 4-star general inspecting the troops and dropped a heavy leather binder onto our table, right between the lobster bisque and the vintage wine. "Happy birthday, Elena," she said simply. I opened the folder and felt my breath hitch in my throat. It was the deed to the Obsidian Palace, a newly completed resort and casino complex on the Strip worth $220 million. The transformation in Derek and Beatrice was instant and absolutely terrifying. One moment they looked at me with boredom, and the next, they were looking at that folder like starving wolves looking at a wounded deer. The indifference vanished, replaced by a naked, trembling greed. Derek did not even congratulate me. He reached for the papers with hands that shook with anticipation. "Elena, sweetie, this is overwhelming," he said, his voice suddenly smooth as oil. "A casino is a dangerous place. It is complex. It is no place for a woman of your gentle nature. You should sign over the management rights to me immediately. I will handle the heavy lifting while you simply enjoy the profits." Before I could respond to his condescension, a woman walked up to our table as if she had been waiting for a cue in the wings. She was stunning, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, and she possessed a predatory grace that set my teeth on edge. Derek introduced her as Sienna, his new strategic advisor, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on her neckline, and I saw the secret. Knowing smirk she shot him. The energy between them was electric and undeniable. This was no advisor. This was the woman he intended to replace me with, brought right to my birthday dinner. I closed the folder and pulled it toward my chest, feeling a sudden surge of cold resolve. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my ears. "I will not be signing anything. Derek, Aunt Josephine gave this to me. I will be the CEO. I will run the Obsidian Palace myself." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Beatrice let out a sharp, cruel laugh that turned heads at the nearby tables. "You," she sneered, looking at me with pure contempt. "You are a decorative piece. Elena, you are a vase. You know nothing about business or power. You will run this empire into the ground before the first week is over. You are an embarrassment to this family, and you will make us a laughingstock." Aunt Josephine swirled her wine, watching the scene with amused detachment. "There is a condition," she said, cutting through the tension. "The deed is yours, Elena, but the board of directors has retained a veto clause. You have a probation period, 30 days. If you fail to meet their standards, they can vote to install a new CEO." Derek smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. He stood up and adjusted his jacket, his arrogance returning tenfold. He looked at Sienna, and then back at me with a pitying expression. "Well then," he said, 30 days is plenty of time. My team and I will show the board what real leadership looks like. Enjoy playing boss while you can. Elena, by next month, you will be back home where you belong, and the adults will take over." The car ride home was a cage match without a referee. Derek gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white, and the moment we merged onto the highway, the facade of the loving husband crumbled completely. He screamed at me, his voice bouncing off the leather interior, accusing me of humiliating him. He called me selfish for not handing over the reins immediately to the man of the house. He said I looked like a stubborn child in front of Josephine and that I had likely cost us the goodwill of the board before we even started. I stared out the window at the passing lights, saying nothing, which only fueled his rage. When we arrived at our villa, there was no respite. Beatrice was waiting in the living room, arms crossed, her face set in a mask of disapproval. It was past midnight, but they forced me onto the sofa for what they called a family meeting. It felt more like an interrogation. Derek paced back and forth, loosening his tie as he listed my deficiencies. He told me I was too plain, too risk-averse, and frankly, too boring to represent a brand as dynamic as the Obsidian Palace. He looked me in the eye and told me that Sienna was the kind of woman who belonged in that world. She was sharp, modern, and cutthroat. She was everything I was not. It was in that moment, watching the vein throb in his forehead, that the pieces fell into place. The way they had looked at each other at the restaurant was not just professional admiration. This was an intimacy built on secrets. I realized then that their affair was not new. It had been festering for months, perhaps longer. And I knew exactly who Sienna was. She was not a strategic genius. She was a disgraced floor manager from a rival casino in Atlantic City, fired for colluding with card counters. Derek was not bringing in an expert. He was bringing in his accomplice. He stopped pacing and leaned down, his face inches from mine. "If you do not sign those papers by tomorrow morning, I am filing for divorce," he hissed. "Think about that. Elena, you have no friends in this town. You have no business experience. Without me, you are just a lonely woman in an empty house with a massive tax burden. You will be destitute within a year." Beatrice chimed in from her armchair, sipping her tea with maddening calmness. "You should sleep in the guest room tonight," she said. "You do not deserve the master suite until you learn your place and learn to support your husband's vision. Go upstairs and think about how lucky you are that Derek is even willing to help you fix this mess." I stood up. I did not cry. I did not beg. My hands were steady as I picked up my purse. Inside, hidden in the side pocket, I slid my finger over the switch of a small, high-fidelity voice recorder. I felt the tiny vibration confirming it was active. They thought they were breaking me, but they were simply handing me ammunition. Then Derek said something that sealed his fate. He muttered to his mother that they needed access to the casino's cash flow immediately because the bank was calling about the house. He admitted, loud and clear, that he had mortgaged our villa to the hilt to invest in a cryptocurrency scheme that had crashed to zero. We were technically homeless, and the casino was his only life raft. I looked at my husband, a man drowning in debt and deceit, and then at his mother, who enabled his every failure. I walked to the archway of the living room and paused. "Enjoy this house while you can," I said. The words hung in the frigid air as I turned my back on them and walked up the stairs alone. They saw a housewife who clipped coupons and organized potlucks. They did not see the woman who had spent her evenings earning a master's degree in risk management and probability mathematics while her husband was out drinking with his friends. I had never told Derek about my advanced education because he had a fragile ego that cracked whenever I showed too much intelligence. To him, numbers were just things on a price tag. But to me, they were a language. I knew how to calculate odds better than any pit boss in Vegas, and I knew that right now. The house advantage was shifting in my favor. 2 days after the disastrous birthday dinner, I met Aunt Josephine and her personal attorney, Marcus, in a dimly lit booth at a diner 10 miles off the strip. It was the last place anyone would look for the owners of a $220 million empire. Josephine slid a cup of black coffee toward me and smiled. She revealed that the terrifying board of directors were actually her oldest friends and allies. They were not there to fire me. They were there to test my mettle. They wanted to see if I could defend my territory. Marcus laid out the plan. We would not intervene immediately to stop Derek. We would employ a strategy of strategic negligence. We would let him run wild. We would give him enough rope to hang himself. I did not need to be physically present at the Obsidian Palace to see the rot setting in. Using the administrative override codes Josephine provided, I logged into the casino's mainframe from my laptop in the guest bedroom. The digital architecture of the casino laid out before me like a map. What I saw made my stomach turn. Derek and Sienna, who had audaciously listed herself as the vice president of operations on the internal directory, were systematically dismantling the security protocols. They were creating deliberate blind spots in the camera coverage and altering the cash handling procedures in the high-limit rooms. It was not just incompetence, it was preparation for theft. I needed more than digital footprints. So I hired a team of forensic accountants and private investigators. They were expensive, costing me $5,000 a week, but they were invisible and efficient. Their reports started flooding in within 48 hours. While I sat at home maintaining the facade of a defeated wife, Derek and Sienna were treating the casino like their personal playground. The surveillance feeds showed them hosting lavish parties in the presidential suite, popping bottles of champagne that retailed for $3,000 each, all charged to the company expense account. They were laughing, drunk on power and stolen wine, completely unaware that the eye in the sky belonged to me. The human cost was even worse. I watched the digital HR logs as Sienna fired 3 shift managers who had been with the property since its construction. Their crime was likely their integrity. In their place, she hired people with the same last name as hers, a parade of cousins and unverified associates with no background checks. She was building a fortress of nepotism to protect their schemes. It was time to test their greed. I worked with Marcus to construct a trap. We created a dossier for a fictional high roller, a whale named Mr. Sterling, who was looking to move a large sum of money through private gaming tables without the usual regulatory scrutiny. We seeded the information through a secure channel I knew Sienna monitored. It was a classic honeypot. If they were just incompetent, they would ignore it. If they were criminals, they would bite. I sat back and watched the screen, waiting for the notification that they had accessed the file. It took less than 20 minutes. I walked into the Monday morning executive briefing wearing a tailored navy suit I had bought with my own savings, looking nothing like the submissive wife Derek had left at home. The silence in the conference room was immediate and heavy. The staff, who had been fed stories about my incompetence, stared as I took a seat at the opposite end of the long mahogany table from my husband. I did not ask for permission. I simply sat down and opened my notebook, projecting an aura of icy calm that seemed to lower the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Sienna did not waste a second. She slid a thick stack of documents down the table toward me with a condescending smile. She announced to the room that these were the quarterly yield projections and suggested I might want to look at the pictures since the text would be too dense for me. The report was filled with deliberately complex gaming jargon and convoluted acronyms designed to humiliate me. She asked me, in front of 20 department heads, if I could explain the drop versus hold percentage on the slot machines, smirking at Derek as if to say, "Watch this train wreck." I did not flinch. I flipped to page 12, scanned the columns, and looked up. I told her that her math was flawed. I pointed out that she was calculating the hold percentage based on the total drop rather than the net win, which artificially inflated the profit margins by 15%. I explained that under Nevada Gaming Commission regulations, this kind of reporting was considered fraudulent. The smirk vanished from her face. She tried to argue, stammering that it was a new accounting method, but her voice lacked conviction. The financial director looked down at his own copy and turned pale, realizing I was right. Derek slammed his hand on the table, shattering the moment. He did not care about the facts. He only cared that his mistress looked foolish. He stood up and shouted at me, calling me a saboteur who was just trying to slow down their progress. He declared that I was a disruption to the workflow and ordered security to revoke my access badge for the Central Executive Suite. He claimed I was a security risk, banning me from the very heart of the building I owned. I left the room with my head high, but the chaos continued on the main floor. Beatrice was holding court at a high-limit baccarat table. She was screaming at a young dealer, demanding $10,000 in chips on credit and threatening to have the poor girl fired if she did not comply. She was treating the casino like her personal piggy bank, unaware that her behavior was driving away legitimate high rollers who watched her tantrum with disgust. But Beatrice was merely a distraction from a darker reality. As I walked past the cashier cages, I noticed a group of men in the VIP lounge who did not fit the profile of our usual clientele. They were exchanging heavy duffel bags for chips but were barely playing any hands. I realized with a jolt of terror that Derek was not just mismanaging the casino, he was using it to launder money for organized crime to plug the massive hole left by his cryptocurrency losses. I tried to slip into the pit boss station to check the physical ledger, but my path was blocked. Two of the men from the VIP lounge stepped in front of me. They were large, with cold, dead eyes. One of them leaned in and quietly told me that I looked lost and should go find the buffet before I got hurt. It was a direct physical threat. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I stood my ground just long enough to burn their faces into my memory before retreating. I cornered Derek in the hallway near the elevators. I kept my voice low but lethal, citing the specific federal statutes regarding money laundering and racketeering. I warned him that he was facing 20 years in federal prison if he continued. Derek just laughed in my face. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated arrogance and told me to save my legal advice for someone who cared. He leaned in and whispered that the board of directors would back him no matter what because he had already bought one of them off. He believed he was untouchable. He had no idea that the corrupt board member he thought he had bribed was actually a plant, a trap set by me and Aunt Josephine to test his integrity. And he had just walked right into it. The smell of desperation in the executive suite was becoming overpowering, with the loan sharks circling and his crypto wallet empty. Derek and Sienna stopped pretending to be managers and started acting like common thieves. I watched on my hidden monitor as they entered the main cage after hours. Sienna distracted the night shift supervisor while Derek stuffed bundles of $100 bills into his briefcase. They were bleeding the casino dry, taking $50,000 here, $80,000 there, trying to fill a bottomless pit of debt. But theft was not enough for Sienna. She wanted total victory. I listened through the audio feed as she whispered poison into Derek's ear. She told him that the board meeting was approaching and they needed a scapegoat. She suggested they frame me for the missing funds. It was a plan born of pure malice. Over the next 24 hours, they created a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to me. They fabricated wire transfers authorized with a forged digital signature of mine and planted a Trojan horse virus on my laptop to make it look like I was siphoning money to an offshore account. They thought they were being clever, but they were painting in a room with glass walls. My parallel surveillance system recorded every keystroke. I saw them backdate the documents. I saw Sienna giggle as she named the fake shell company after my maiden name. I did not stop them. I needed the frame job to be complete so that when the truth came out, it would be undeniable. While the conspirators plotted, Beatrice was busy digging her own grave on the casino floor. She had been on a losing streak that defied statistical probability, dropping nearly $150,000 at the roulette wheel in 2 nights. When the pit boss finally cut her off, she stormed into Derek's office, demanding he wipe her debt from the books. I expected Derek to cave, as he always did, but the pressure had turned him into something unrecognizable. He looked at his own mother with cold, dead eyes and told her she was on her own. He said he could not cover her losses and that if she could not pay, she would have to face the consequences like any other degenerate gambler. Beatrice stood there, stunned and trembling, realizing for the first time that her golden boy would sacrifice her to save himself. I waited until she was sitting alone in the lobby, weeping into a martini, before I made my move. I sat down next to her, not as a daughter-in-law, but as a harbinger of doom. I leaned in close and whispered that Derek was planning to let her take the fall for the financial irregularities to save his own skin. I told her that in federal prison, they did not care about her pedigree. I watched the terror take root in her eyes. She looked at the elevator where her son was hiding, and for the first time, I saw hate mix with the fear. Upstairs, the alliance between Derek and Sienna was fracturing. The stolen cash was not stretching far enough, and they began to turn on each other. I heard shouting matches echoing through the vents. Derek accused Sienna of skimming off the top of their loot. Sienna accused Derek of being too cowardly to finish the job. Paranoia was setting in. They jumped at shadows, eyeing each other with suspicion, their hands hovering near their pockets. It was the perfect moment to play my ace, my plant. The fictional high roller Mr. Sterling walked through the front doors. He was impeccable, confident, and carried the promise of salvation. He requested a private meeting with Derek and laid a proposition on the table that smelled of danger and opportunity. He offered to wash $10 million of illicit cash through the casino in a single night, promising a 20% cut for the house. It was a death sentence if they got caught, but it was the only way out of the hole they had dug. I watched Derek's face on the monitor. I saw the fear war with the greed, and I saw the exact moment the greed won. He shook the hand of the man who would destroy him. The bait was swallowed whole, driven by a greed that had long ago eclipsed their survival instincts. Derek and Sienna accepted the proposal from my plant, Mr. Sterling. They agreed to launder $10 million in cartel cash, a felony that carried a sentence so heavy it would bury them for the rest of their natural lives. The exchange was set for 3 a.m. in the main counting room, the heart of the casino where the blood flow of currency was supposed to be most secure. I watched from a hidden observation deck built into the false wall behind the server room, a secret architectural feature my Aunt Josephine had shown me only days prior. I was not alone. To my left sat the state police chief, a man with a jaw of granite, and to my right was the Attorney General, holding a notepad. On the monitors, we watched Derek type in the override code that shut down the official security grid. The red recording lights on the main cameras blinked out. Derek turned to Sienna and grinned, believing they were now invisible to the world. He had no idea that the backup surveillance system, hardwired into the building's foundation and accessible only by the true owner, was capturing every pixel in high-definition 4K resolution. The tension in the small room was suffocating as the bags were unzipped. Stacks of cash sat on the table, a mountain of illegal tender. But then the script flipped. Sienna, who had been nervously checking her watch, made her move. As Derek turned to log the first bundle into the laundering software, Sienna grabbed 2 of the largest duffel bags and backed toward the emergency exit. She was not there to help him. She was there to rob him and run. She had a flight booked to the Cayman Islands, and she was leaving Derek to take the fall alone. Derek caught her reflection in the glass of the counting machine. He spun around, his face twisting from triumph to pure rage. He lunged across the table, tackling her before she could reach the door. What followed was a vicious screaming match that served as the perfect confession. In their anger, they stopped speaking in code. Derek screamed that he had falsified the books to cover her mistakes. Sienna shrieked back that she was the one who had planted the virus on my computer and forged the wire transfers to frame me. They listed their crimes one by one, loud and clear for the microphone hidden in the ceiling vent. Then, a shadow moved in the hallway outside the glass doors. It was Beatrice. She had come down, likely to beg her son for money again or to apologize, but she had frozen in the corridor. Through the glass, she heard everything. She heard Sienna mock Derek for using his mother's credit to fund their lifestyle. She heard Derek scream that he did not care about his mother, that she was dead weight, and that he would sell the family home out from under her if it meant keeping Sienna happy. I saw Beatrice put a hand over her mouth, her world shattering as she realized the son she worshipped was a monster who had already sold her out. The state police chief reached for his radio, his thumb hovering over the button to send in the SWAT team waiting in the garage. Now he asked. I put a hand on his arm. No, I whispered. Not yet. If we arrest them now, it is just conspiracy. Let them finish the transaction. Let them mix the dirty money with the casino vault funds. I want the crime to be absolute. I want no possibility of parole. We waited for another hour. We watched them reconcile out of necessity. Their hatred for each other paused only by their greed. They processed the money, unaware that every bill was marked and every keystroke was logged. By the time they finished, the sun was coming up over the Nevada desert. They left the room, sweaty and exhausted, but smiling, believing they had pulled off the perfect crime and secured enough money to buy the board's loyalty. They went home to change for the meeting, confident that today they would finally destroy me. I watched them leave, feeling a cold, grim satisfaction. They were walking into a slaughter, and they were the cattle. The conference room on the top floor of the Obsidian Palace was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended in the sky, offering a panoramic view of the strip that made the cars below look like ants. Inside, the atmosphere was colder than the liquid nitrogen cocktails served at the bar downstairs. The 12 members of the board sat around the oval table like statues carved from granite, their faces completely devoid of emotion. They did not speak to one another. They did not check their watches. They simply waited. The double doors swung open, and Derek strode in as if he had already been crowned king. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit that I knew cost $4,000 because I had seen the credit card alert on my phone that morning. On his arm was Sienna, dressed in a power suit that was a shade too bright for a corporate setting, clutching a leather portfolio like a weapon. They walked with a synchronized swagger, radiating the intoxicating confidence of people who believe they have successfully committed the perfect crime. They nodded at the board members, mistaking the heavy silence for respect. Derek took the floor immediately. He did not bother with pleasantries. He launched into a presentation that was a masterpiece of corporate buzzwords and empty promises. He spoke of synergy and vertical integration, using many words to say absolutely nothing. He projected charts that showed imaginary growth curves and claimed that under his guidance, the casino would triple its revenue in 2 quarters. Then came the pivot. He sighed theatrically, adopting a tone of sorrowful reluctance. He told the board that unfortunately, there was a cancer eating away at the company's potential. That cancer, he claimed, was me. He argued that my lack of experience and emotional instability were liabilities they could no longer afford. He gestured to Sienna, introducing her as the Cure, the visionary leader who had practically been running the place while I played house. Sienna stood up, playing her part with nauseating precision. She lowered her eyes, feigning hesitation. She told the board that it pained her to bring personal matters into a professional setting, but she felt a duty to the shareholders. She spun a tale about my alleged affairs, claiming I was absent from meetings because I was meeting lovers in hotel rooms. She painted me as a hysterical, neglectful wife who was too busy destroying her marriage to manage a business. It was a projection of her own sins, so bold and shameless that I almost admired the audacity. In the corner of the room, far away from the head of the table, sat Beatrice. She was usually the loudest voice in any room, but today she was shrunk into herself, clutching her handbag with white knuckles. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between her son and me with a look of pure, unadulterated panic. She had seen the monster beneath Derek's skin the night before, and for the first time, she looked less like a matriarch and more like a frightened old woman who realized she was trapped on a sinking ship. Derek moved to the kill. He slid a thick dossier across the polished mahogany table toward the chairman. This, he announced gravely, was irrefutable proof of embezzlement. He claimed the documents showed that I had siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars into shell accounts. He looked at me with a triumphant sneer, waiting for me to crumble or scream. The chairman, a man named Arthur who had played poker with my grandfather, did not open the dossier. He simply rested his hand on it and looked at me. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice dry and neutral. "Do you have a defense against these serious accusations?" I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my skirt. I did not look at Derek or Sienna. I looked straight at Arthur. I smiled. and it was the only genuine smile in the room. "I do not need a defense," I said calmly. "I just need to show you a short film." I pressed a single button on the remote control, and the oversized projection screen behind me, which Derek had just used to display his hollow projections, flickered and changed. The corporate logo vanished, replaced by the high-definition footage from the counting room recorded only 6 hours prior. The room was suddenly bathed in the cold, clinical blue light of the surveillance feed. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the amplified voices coming from the speakers, crisp and undeniable. The video played out like a slow-motion train wreck. Every member of the board watched as Derek and Sienna stacked bundles of illicit cash on the counting table. But the visual evidence was nothing compared to the audio. The sound quality was pristine, capturing every whisper of their conspiracy. The room echoed with Derek's voice calling me a naive fool, bragging about how easy it was to frame me for embezzlement because I trusted him. Then came the twist that made the board members lean forward. The speakers blasted Sienna's voice as she detailed her plan to take the money and run to the Cayman Islands, leaving Derek to face the FBI alone. It was a symphony of betrayal, played at maximum volume. The color drained from Derek's face so fast it looked as if he had been physically struck. For a second, he was paralyzed, staring at his own digital ghost admitting to a felony. Then, panic took over. He lunged toward the console, screaming for someone to turn it off, his composure shattering into a million pieces. He never made it to the controls. 2 security guards, who had been waiting in the shadows, stepped forward and restrained him, forcing him back into his chair. He struggled against their grip, a desperate animal caught in a trap of his own making. Sienna reacted with the survival instinct of a cornered rat. She jumped up, knocking her chair over, and pointed a shaking finger at Derek. She screamed that she was a victim, that Derek had forced her to participate, that she had been afraid for her life. It was a pathetic performance. The video on the screen clearly showed her laughing as she stuffed money into her bag, mocking Derek behind his back. Her lies evaporated the moment they left her lips, and she collapsed into her seat, sobbing dry, tearless sobs. I did not let up. I reached into my bag and pulled out a second stack of documents, slamming them onto the table with a satisfying thud. I told the board that while Derek was busy playing gangster, he had also been destroying our personal finances. I revealed the foreclosure notice on our home, which he had secretly mortgaged to invest in a cryptocurrency scam that had gone to zero. I produced the marker slips for Beatrice's gambling debts, totaling $150,000, proving that the family was insolvent and desperate. The chairman, Arthur, picked up the papers and nodded solemnly. He looked at Derek with profound disappointment. Then he revealed something that took even me by surprise. He told the room that the board had not just been watching the crimes, they had been watching the solutions. He pulled out independent audit reports confirming that for the past 3 weeks, every time Derek made a catastrophic error in the scheduling or the tax filings, I had anonymously logged in and corrected it. They knew I was the one keeping the ship afloat. They knew I was the one with the talent. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room opened, and Aunt Josephine walked in. She did not look like a retired socialite. She looked like an executioner. She stood at the head of the table and declared that Derek's probation period was terminated immediately. She stripped him of his title, his salary, and his dignity in one breath. The reality finally crushed Derek. The arrogance that had sustained him for years dissolved, leaving behind a weak, terrified man. He slid out of his chair and fell to his knees on the plush carpet. He crawled toward me, reaching for the hem of my skirt, tears streaming down his face. He begged me to make it stop. He invoked our marriage vows. He reminded me of the 10 years we had spent together, pleading for mercy, asking me to save him from prison. I looked down at him, and I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just a profound pity that I had ever wasted my life on someone so small. I pulled my skirt away from his grasping hands. I gestured to the sobbing woman across the table who had helped him destroy me. "You replaced me with her," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You wanted a partner in crime. Now, let her save you." The doors to the conference room burst open with a force that shook the glass walls. It was not the waitstaff bringing coffee. It was a squad of FBI agents and officers from the Economic Crimes Unit. The timing was impeccable, coordinated perfectly by the state police chief who had been sitting in the surveillance room with me just hours before. The air in the room shifted instantly from corporate tension to legal severity. The agents swarmed the table, their movements precise and practiced, ignoring the expensive suits and the panoramic view of the city. Derek and Sienna were hauled to their feet. The officers recited their rights, but the words seemed to bounce off Derek's stunned expression. He was being charged with embezzlement, money laundering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and racketeering. When the agent twisted Derek's arms behind his back and the handcuffs ratcheted shut, the sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. It was the sound of his life ending. Sienna did not accept her fate with any dignity. As two female officers grabbed her arms, she snapped. She lunged sideways, her manicured nails aiming for Derek's face. She screamed that he was a liar and a failure, clawing at the man she had conspired with just hours ago. It was a grotesque display of chaos, a physical manifestation of their toxic relationship imploding. The agents had to physically drag her back, creating a scene of humiliation that the board members watched with stoic revulsion. Beatrice, who had been cowering in the corner, let out a wail that grated on my nerves. She rushed toward the officers, grabbing at their uniforms, begging them not to take her son. She looked at me, her eyes swollen and red, and screamed for me to do something, to use my money to make this go away. She appealed to my duty as a wife, completely forgetting that she had spent the last week trying to destroy me. I did not answer her. Instead, I signaled to Marcus, my attorney. He stepped forward and intercepted Beatrice. He did not offer her a tissue. He handed her a thick envelope stamped with the seal of the Nevada Superior Court. He explained in a monotone voice that this was a seizure notice. Since Derek had used the deed to her home as collateral for his gambling debts and the illegal loans he took to cover his crypto losses, the property was now being foreclosed upon to reimburse the casino's accounts. She was not just losing her son, she was losing her home, her car, and her status. She stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, realizing she was now destitute. While the chaos swirled around us, I remained seated at the head of the table. Marcus placed a single document in front of me. It was the divorce petition. I uncapped my pen and signed my name with a steady hand. I looked up at Derek, who was being held by two agents near the door. I told him to look at the papers. I explained that he had clearly never read the prenuptial agreement he signed 10 years ago because he was too arrogant to think he would ever need it. I cited the morality clause. It stated clearly that if one party committed adultery and was convicted of a felony, they forfeited all claims to marital assets and spousal support. He was leaving this marriage with exactly what he brought into it, which was absolutely nothing. The chairman of the board cleared his throat, drawing the attention back to the business at hand. With the criminals restrained and the distractions removed, he called for a formal vote. He asked who was in favor of confirming Elena Vance as the permanent chairwoman and chief executive officer of the Obsidian Palace. One by one, 12 hands went up. It was unanimous. There was no debate, no hesitation. They had seen the steel beneath the silk, and they knew I was the only one who could steer the ship. The police finally began to march the prisoners out. As they exited the boardroom and walked down the long hallway toward the elevators, a low rumble began. The casino staff, the dealers, the pit bosses, and the administrative assistants had lined the corridor. They had heard the rumors, and now they saw the truth. As Derek was paraded past them in handcuffs, head hung low in shame, they began to clap. It started as a ripple and grew into a roar of applause. They were not cheering for his downfall, they were cheering for their own liberation. They were cheering for me. I walked to the door of the conference room and watched the elevator doors close on my husband and his mistress. Beatrice was trailing behind them, sobbing loudly. I caught the eye of the head of security. I pointed a finger at my mother-in-law. I told him to escort her off the premises immediately. I gave the order that she was to be banned for life from the casino, the hotel, and every subsidiary property we owned. If she set foot on the pavement outside, she was to be arrested for trespassing. The guard nodded, took Beatrice by the arm, and led her away from the life she so desperately wanted but no longer deserved. 7 days after the boardroom doors closed on my past life, I stood on the private terrace of the penthouse suite, the wind whipping the hem of my silk dress. Below me, the Las Vegas Strip was a river of liquid neon, a chaotic and beautiful testament to human ambition. The air up here was different. It no longer smelled of stale anxiety and perfume. It smelled of ozone and absolute freedom. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the empire that was finally, truly mine. The transition had been swift and brutal, exactly as it needed to be. In just 1 week, I had purged the rot from the organization. I fired every single manager Sienna had appointed, replacing them with the veteran staff members she had wrongfully terminated. I brought back the shift supervisors who knew the names of their dealers and the security guards who actually watched the monitors. The morale in the building had shifted from fear to a focused, electric energy. We were no longer a sinking ship, we were a fortress. The morning papers were still scattered on the patio table, fluttering in the breeze. The headlines were relentless. The local Gazette featured a mugshot of Derek, looking haggard and defeated, alongside a caption detailing his likely sentence of 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. His arrogance had been his shield, and without it, he looked like a frightened child. Sienna fared no better. Her arrest had triggered a nationwide database hit, revealing a string of identity theft charges across 3 states. She was currently being fought over by 3 different district attorneys, each wanting to be the one to put her away. As for Beatrice, justice had been poetic. With her assets seized and her reputation incinerated, she had been forced to move into a subsidized housing unit on the outskirts of town. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she spent her days sitting on a plastic chair on her porch, telling anyone who would listen that she used to be royalty. But her old friends from the country club would not even take her calls. Aunt Josephine stepped out of the shadows, holding 2 flutes of vintage champagne. She looked younger than she had in years, her eyes sparkling with pride. She handed 1 glass to me and raised hers toward the skyline. "To the new Queen of Las Vegas," she said. I took a sip, savoring the sharp, cold taste of victory. I turned to her and revealed my final move. I told her that the casino profits from my first week of legitimate operations were substantial, and I had already put them to use. I had acquired the controlling stake in the mid-sized logistics firm where Derek used to work, the very place where his old cronies had once mocked me at company picnics. My first act as owner was to terminate their contracts for cause, clearing out the last remnants of the club that had enabled his behavior. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a collect call from the Clark County Detention Center. I looked at the screen, seeing the notification. It was the phone Derek had given me 5 years ago, a hand-me-down he claimed was top of the line because he had upgraded to a newer model. It was the device he used to track me, to control me, and to dismiss me. I did not slide the bar to answer. I did not feel a flicker of hesitation. I walked to the edge of the balcony and tossed the device over the railing. I watched it tumble end over end into the darkness of the alley below, vanishing into the void. I turned my back on the night and took the private elevator down to the main floor. When the doors opened, the hum of the casino floor seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. The atmosphere was different now. As I walked across the marble floor, the dealers looked up and nodded with genuine respect. The pit bosses straightened their ties. The floor managers offered greetings that were not born of fear, but of admiration. I was no longer the invisible wife. I was the architect of their security. Above the reception desk, the 24-hour news ticker scrolled a single, defining sentence in bright red letters. The board of directors of the Obsidian Palace confirms a new era under the leadership of Mrs. Elena Vance. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please leave a comment down below, letting me know where you are listening from so we can share our thoughts together. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories. Like this video, and press the hype button so this story can reach even more people.